Okay, first of all, we're going to see some messy stuff tonight. Words, videos. Nobody will think less of you if you can't deal with it. And I will not be insulted if you drop out, because I've watched these things many times and they still upset me, but it serves a purpose to watch this. Second thing is, we're going to be saying some bad things about psychiatrists and the profession. It is not my intention to give it a black mark. The profession of psychiatry has helped a lot of people, relieved a lot of pain, made a lot of people functioning citizens again where they were not before. We're talking about a group of rogues who were in the right place at the right time, or perhaps the wrong place at the wrong time, and created this nightmare. Now, how I got into this is my first boss, and now my friend, a man named Jacob Sternberg, is producing a series of books, articles, videos, teaching materials built around the theme that there's more to the Holocaust than the death of 6 million Jews. He is a Holocaust survivor, a former Israeli paratroop officer, and the son of two people who were partisans during the war. And he deeply resents the image, particularly among non-Jews, of the image of the Holocaust, particularly among non-Jews, is a bunch of starving people behind barbed wire, complacently walking into gas chambers. And he resents that deeply because there's so much more. But tonight, he had asked me to look a little bit into the interaction between the psychiatric profession and the Holocaust. And what I found was really disturbing. Every time I found a fact, it would lead to 3 more facts, which would lead to 3 more, which would lead to 3 more. And eventually, I wrote a paper which will become part of what he's offering. And while discussing this over dinner, Judy got the idea of having me do this presentation. So with all of that, let me get started. Come on. I don't know why it's not letting me share. There we go. We're here to talk about psychiatry and the Holocaust. First, I want to just hit some key dates because they're important. Of course, 1933, Hitler becomes chancellor and effectively assumes total power. September 1935, the Nuremberg race laws effectively totally disenfranchised all Jews in Germany, considered to be the official start date of the Holocaust. There are, in fact, some plans to have a centennial memorial in 2035. And of course, we all know Kristallnacht, 1938. And in 1939, in a speech at the Reichstag, it effectively became a capital crime punishable by death to be a Jew. And now we have the start of World War II, Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. And this is an important date, 1941, the end of 1941, the first killing camp, Chemlo, officially opens. And then the United States declares war on Japan. And because of the alliance with Japan, Germany declares war on the US. And then in 1945, we have the German surrender. And to a lot of people, between 1941 and 1945 is what they consider the Holocaust. What I'm going to show you tonight is an awful lot happened before that led up to it. And then, of course, we've got the bombing at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the war ends. And as I said, these are the dates that people consider the beginning and the end of the Holocaust. And I think they're wrong. Okay, now, the Holocaust was about more than just numbers, but a number like 6 million, you need some context. So I put this graphic together showing large numbers of deaths. The Trail of Tears is, of course, the forced march of Indians from their homeland to their relocation. The Armenian massacre, 100,000. I put in the bombings at Hiroshima and Nagasaki because this is what we talk about so often, and it is a mere 300,000. The Rwandan Civil War, 600,000. Pol Pot, and now we come to the Holocaust, which just kind of jumps out, whether you say 6 million or 12 million. I've left off Stalin and his craziness. Psychiatric professionals will excuse me when I say he was a major nutcase and doesn't really fit this image. Now, the reason I say that the Holocaust is so much more than the death of 6 million Jews is elderly Holocaust survivors have over a 90% incidence of PTSD. All right. They have an increased risk of suicide, depression, and various other diseases. An interesting side note is the Holocaust survivors who live in Israel are doing better than Holocaust survivors across the world. Now, some things about the Holocaust just never made sense to me. It was too big and too organized to just be the result of one anti-Semitic sociopath paper hanger. It was carefully constructed and operated on a scale of US steel. Now, what I mean by this is when Judy came back from the tour of Auschwitz and she described the length of the rail line from the entrance to the barracks, it reminded me of a sales call I made at US Steel. We went to the front desk and told them who we were going to see and asked how to find his office. And the receptionist said, well, you go back out to your car, you get on the interstate, you drive about 2 miles, come into the back of the building, and he'll be right there. I mean, we're talking about a big operation. It required the development of new technologies and was something that only could have been created by a totalitarian regime. It required an underlying scientific justification. And I want to emphasize that because that turns out to be really the key to this whole thing. This wasn't just casual. Okay, which brings me to the topic of eugenics, which, if you have not heard of it, is the study of how to arrange reproduction within a human population to increase the occurrence of heritable characteristics. Well, now who can complain? We all want our kids to marry as well as possible. Eugenics got a little bit beyond that. Developed in the 19th century by Sir Francis Galton, it's a method of improving humanity. During the 20th century, it was increasingly discredited as unscientific and racial. This didn't kill it, this just discredited it. This is different from evolution in that evolution occurs within a species due to environmental changes, and it could be climate change, could be introduction of a competitive species. It's not directed, it's not proactive. The eugenics movement started long before the Holocaust and continued long after. It's still alive, unfortunately, today. And it moved from simply arranged marriages to forced sterilization to outright killings. The science fiction fans out there will remember Robert Heinlein's Methuselah's Children or Larry Niven's Ringworld, in which selective breeding played a major role. That is a long way from what happened here. During the Holocaust, the eugenics movement in Germany took a really dark, outright proactive turn. And amazingly, these numbers were dubbed as euthanasia. These murders were dubbed as euthanasia. Now, we've got a number of key figures here. There was an American lawyer, an anthropologist, known primarily for his work as eugenics, a man named Madison Grant. He was an advocate of scientific racism and one of the leading thinkers of the progressive era. Grant wrote a book called The Passing of the Great Race, which was embraced by proponents of the National Socialist movement in Germany. It was the first non-German book ordered to be reprinted when the Nazis took power. When Hitler was writing Mein Kampf, he wrote to Grant, "This book is my Bible." And at the post-war Nuremberg trials, excerpts from this book were introduced as evidence on behalf of Hitler's personal physician, head of the Nazi euthanasia program, to justify the population policies of the Third Reich. Now, this is the man, if you're going to hate somebody, this is a man to pay attention to. Heinrich Ruden. Born in 1893, a renowned psychiatrist and a major advocate that the German race was becoming polluted. At a conference on alcoholism in 1903, he argued for the sterilization of incurable alcoholics. I spent a little more time on him because I really don't like this man. In 1904, he was appointed co-editor of the Archive for Racial Hygiene and Social Biology. In 1905, he was among the co-founders of the German Society for Racial Hygiene. He published an article that argued that medical care for mental alcoholics, epileptics, and others was a distortion of natural law, and that medicine should help to clean the genetic pool. 1942, speaking of euthanasia, Ruden emphasized the value of eliminating young children of clearly inferior quality. Now keep an eye on these two things. Medicine should help clean the genetic pool, and eliminating young children of clearly inferior quality. Still upsets me to this day, no matter how often I read this. Ruden and Hitler. You could say a match made in heaven or made someplace. Ruden was a psychiatrist and a racist and a strong advocate of euthanasia of inferiors. For Ruden and Hitler, it was love at first sight. Ruden gave Hitler something he craved. As I mentioned before, he needed a scientific basis for his beliefs. Hitler gave Ruden what he needed, funding to implement his ideas. And this was a perfect storm. Ruden is the one that convinced Hitler to move from passive eugenics to killing. Somehow this man has stayed under the radar for years. I do not know how. Shortly thereafter, euthanasia centers began to appear throughout Germany. I could easily nominate Ruden as the father of the Holocaust. We'll see as his ideas continue to be shown tonight. In 1939, with Hitler's financial backing, euthanasia centers began to appear around Germany. Beginning in the fall of 1939, gassing installations were established at Bernburg, Brandenburg, Grafneck, Hadamar, Hartheim, and Sonnestein. Patients were selected by doctors and transferred from clinics to one of these centralized gassing installations and killed. I guess the German translation of the Hippocratic Oath had some errors. It was at these centers that the prototype for mass killings was developed. The patients were gassed and the bodies cremated. And again, I'm going to emphasize these dates were before the first camp was open. This was the fall of 1939, a good year beforehand. So it starts. In January of 1939, the first gassing test was conducted using carbon monoxide at the Brandenburg Sanitarium. Between 18 and 20 people were killed, watched by psychiatrists, physicians, and nurses. So as I said, they must have had a different reading on the Hippocratic Oath than I have. In 1941, the Psychiatric Institute of Hadamar celebrated the cremation of its 10,000 patients, where everyone, secretaries, nurses, and psychiatrists, received a bottle of beer for the occasion. So they held a tailgate party. And again, I'm going to emphasize the dates. All of this took place before the first killing camp officially opened. By 1940, there were 6 killing centers. The Hadamar Psychiatric Institute near Wiesbaden, Germany, codenamed Facility E, was refashioned to use as a euthanasia facility. Patients were offloaded, weighed, photographed, and led to gas chambers that were disguised as shower rooms. Now, I have another clip that I'm not going to show tonight. If this weren't such grim, it would be funny. But when the patients were examined with a German penchant for detail, they examined the head of each patient, counted the number of lice, classified them by size, and documented. These documents appeared, I believe it was in 2005, when the Anwar archives were discovered. There's some talk that the patients were given bars of soap to convince them they were going into a shower. I have not been able to find documentation on that, but there are people who assure me it was true. Wouldn't surprise me. And in 1942, after a short break, the facility began to function again as a euthanasia center. The bodies were buried in mass graves located on the hospital grounds, and the center remained operational until liberated by American troops in 1945. And I'm going to keep coming back to looking at these dates. These are photographs of the gas chambers and the graves at Hadamar. I just find it interesting that they're actually individual graves, whereas later on, as the Holocaust grew, they were true mass graves. And here's a summary of the psychiatric euthanasia killings prior to the opening at Kemlo. You will note that 70,000 people were killed in these psychiatric euthanasia centers before the December 1941 date. Now, I'm going to show a clip, and in the interest of transparency, I've got to say, when I saw this clip, I checked the source of the website, and it was a division of the Church of Scientology. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, Scientologists blame psychiatrists for everything from climate change to dandruff. Nevertheless, the people here, I looked them up, they're real. I even spoke to some of them, and this appears to be factual. So let me play this clip.
Eugenics movement in Germany was somewhat different than the eugenics movement in the United States in that there were many more physicians and psychiatrists. Alfred Plutz was one of the pioneers in the German eugenics movement and how to control the population of those whom he considered inferior. In 1905, along with his brother-in-law, Ernst Ruden, he established the first organization for racial hygiene.
Alle Völker müssen eine außerordentlich große Zahl von minderwertigen Schwächlinge, Kränkliche und Krüppel mit sich schleppen. Durch eine weise Gesetzgebung in diese Richtung wird auch zugleich in rationellster Weise die erforderliche Zuchtwahl getrieben werden können.
Hitler was particularly impressed by American eugenicist Madison Grant. Grant's book, The Passing of the Great Race, was proclaimed by Hitler as his personal Bible. In his book Mein Kampf, Hitler further hailed eugenics as the science that would rebuild the German nation.
Wer körperlich und geistig nicht gesund und würdig ist, darf sein Leid nicht im Körper seines Kindes verewigen. Das Recht der persönlichen Freiheit tritt zurück gegenüber der Pflicht der Erhaltung der Rasse.
The German eugenicists welcomed the Nazi advent to power because the Nazi program could fund the very programs that they had in mind. The Nazis gave them political support, financial support, and conversely, the psychiatrists gave the Nazis a medical justification for their genocidal policies.
Something like 40% of German psychiatrists had joined the SS by 1933. They weren't forced into the SS. They just joined it naturally because the beliefs were very, very similar.
Ruden and his work led directly to the decision to move from sterilization to murder.
Their plan was simple. First, convince the public that feeble-minded undesirables wanted to escape the burden of their existence, but could not say it, and that killing them was an act of mercy. Then extend the definition of inferior to include Jehovah's Witnesses, Jews, gypsies, homosexuals, all unworthy of life. Psychiatrists produced propaganda movies known as the killing films, shown in all 5,300 theaters throughout Germany.
Geisteskrankheit ist als ein Erbübel eine der größten Gefahren für die Volksgesundheit. Irrtum ist, dass sich solche Kranken glücklich fühlen und am Leben hängen. Sie haben überhaupt kein Daseinsbewusstsein. Wer von ihr befallen wird, dem ist die schwerste Last des Schicksals auferlegt. Ein Dasein ohne Leben.
It first started with passive violence, which is starvation. It then intensified to lethal injections, and finally it developed into systematic gassing and cremation.
Their headquarters were established in Berlin under the infamous codename T4.
T4 program was named after Tiergarten 4, which essentially resulted over a period of time in the murder of about 70,000 people who were deemed mentally retarded, emotionally distraught, or physically handicapped by the Germans. They were called life unworthy of living.
The killing, piloted in psychiatric institutions across Germany, then moved into the concentration camps, with top German psychiatrists as the executioners. Paul Nietzsche, the T4 director, declared,
Die Durchkämmung der KZs fand nach genau denselben Gesichtspunkten, anhand derselben Meldebögen statt wie die der Irrenhäuser.
6 million Jews died in concentration camps and as a result of Nazi extermination policies. Rudin congratulated Hitler for making his, that is Rudin's, 30-year dream come true.
You can see why I don't have a very high opinion of Dr. Rudin. Okay, the Nazis started a massive propaganda campaign using everything available at the time, newspapers, posters. The theme was the Jews were evil, they were diluting Aryan blood, they were communists, therefore linked to the Russian enemy. Now, you've got to remember there was no internet, no television, right? So they produced a series of movies called killing films that were mandatory viewing and were run in all theaters. This poster on the right is the Germans turned out were truly scared of typhus. We're going to see more about that. And over here on the left, we've got anti-Semitic newspapers posted in public, and people reading them. Now, I believe my next slide is one of the killing films. It took me a while to find something that had proper subtitles and that wasn't too long. Now, try to imagine having to watch one of these every week.
Eine verblüffende Parallele zu dieser jüdischen Wanderung durch die ganze Welt bieten uns die Massenwanderungen eines ebenso ruhelosen Tieres, der Ratte. Wo Ratten auch auftauchen, tragen sie Vernichtung ins Land, zerstören sie menschliche Güter und Nahrungsmittel. Auf diese Weise verbreiten sie Krankheiten, Pest, Lepra, Typhus, Cholera, Ruhr und so weiter. Sie sind hinterlistig, feige und grausam und treten meist in großen Scharen auf. Sie stellen unter den Tieren das Element der heimtückischen unterirdischen Zerstörung dar. Nicht anders als die Juden unter den Menschen. Wir erkennen, dass hier ein Pestherd liegt, der die Gesundheit der arischen Völker bedroht.
I think that's enough. Now, what is the role of the SS doing in this? They were charged with the primary responsibility of enforcing the racial purity laws. By the end of the war, membership in the SS grew to almost 500,000 members. We've already heard that at the beginning, psychiatrists made up a large portion of the SS. They were generally considered stupid, arrogant bullies. Well, they were arrogant bullies, but they were actually Germany's intellectual elite. In 1933, when Hitler took power, 40% of the psychiatrists in Germany were members of the SS. The level of education in the SS was far superior to that of the German public in general. Figured it was considered a desirable career path. Yes, you read this right. There was a very high level of PhDs among SS personnel. Immediately following Hitler's ascension to power, the number of PhDs in the SS nearly tripled. Here, just before Hitler took power, it was 9%. Within a couple of years, the number jumped up into the 20%, until almost a quarter of the members of the SS had PhDs. Now, percentages tend to be a bit deceiving. So let's look at the hard numbers. In 1933, there were about 5,000 PhDs in the SS. By 1940, there were 60,000. By the end of the war, we have close to 250,000. This was an astounding commitment of men and resources, considering by the end of the war, let me use better language, the Germans were getting their ass kicked on 3 fronts. This was almost a 4th front. And somebody had to be driving this insanity. Now, Jacob, who got me to do this, insists that whenever we talk about the Holocaust, we've got to talk about the good guys. You don't hear enough about them. We all know about Schindler, but Schindler it's heresy to say anything negative about a man who saved 1,000 lives, but he operated in the open. Germans knew he was there. They thought he was helping the war effort. There are people who operated out of true altruism at great risk. Doing these things, they could easily have been executed and their families could have been executed. So I picked 3 that really stood out. I love these guys and I wish I could pronounce their names. Dr. Lazowski and Dr. Matlowitz. Anybody wants to correct my pronunciation, please do. What these gentlemen did was they faked a typhus epidemic. And the Germans, being so scared of typhus, pulled out and left 12 villages on their own. They injected the Jews with a benign form of typhus, and then informed the Nazis there was an epidemic at large. The Nazis ran for cover, quarantined the town, and left it to its own devices. Known as the Polish Schindlers, the 2 of them saved 12 ghetto communities, 8,000 people. Lazowski said, "I was not able to fight with a gun or a sword, but I was able to find a way to scare the Germans." These were amazing men. When you consider the risks they faced. My second choice was Hankowitz. I hope I have that name right. He deserves it. Within the Krakow ghetto, there were 4 pre-war pharmacies owned by non-Jews. The Nazis offered to relocate them outside of the city. Hankowitz decided to stay in the city. And he was given permission to operate his establishment as the only pharmacy in the ghetto. He supplied medications and pharmaceutical products to the residents, often free of charge. And the risk here was huge. Then, apart from health considerations, he dispensed hair dyes to disguise the identities of the Jews and tranquilizers to children to keep them silent during Gestapo raids. It's a brave man. Now, I believe there was actually a movie made about Irina Sendler. She was a doctor and is credited with rescuing 2,500 Jews from the Warsaw Ghetto. She was head of the children's section of Zagota, secret organization that was counseled to aid Jews. Her actions aroused the attention of the Gestapo, and she was arrested, tortured, and sentenced to death. A bribe saved her life, but nonetheless, she was left unconscious in a forest with both her arms and legs broken. I'm going to say it again. This woman had absolutely nothing to gain from this. She just did this because she couldn't stand watching what was wrong. Israel has created a category called righteous among nations. We sometimes use the phrase righteous Gentiles. The righteous among nations is an honorific created by the state of Israel to describe non-Jews who, for purely altruistic reasons, risk their lives to save Jews from extermination. Each of these people was vetted as thoroughly as we might vet a Medal of Honor winner. There's no word of mouth here. Each one is carefully documented. Sometimes some people refer to these as the Israeli Medal of Honor. As of January 2021, 27,000, almost 28,000 people were on this list. This table is not representative. You can get the whole list off the internet. It goes on for pages. Being numbers oriented, I looked at this and I said 28,000 people. Suppose each one saved 20 Jewish lives. That's 500,000 people. I mean, that's a serious number. Now, I'm kind of moving out of facts here into some opinions, but here we go. In order to have the Holocaust, which was an absolutely singular event in human history, you had to start with an underlying prejudice, which has always been there. You need an established community, in this case, the psychiatric community, to lend credibility to the eugenics nonsense. And you needed a totalitarian state that provided personnel and funding on a nation state level, created a huge propaganda campaign and a legal structure. Now, the most amazing thing about the Holocaust, as I said, I mentioned Stalin as a nutcase. He would wake up one morning and decide the doctors were out to get him and kill the doctors. And then he'd wake up another morning and the army officers were out to get him and he'd kill them. Every step of the Holocaust was handled by the book. Laws were passed, structures were created. It was this national, I don't even want to say German, it was this national socialist mania for order. Remove any of these elements and you have an ugly pogrom, but you do not have a Holocaust. Now, I don't blame the psychiatric community, but if you remove that, some driver would have been necessary to elevate the underlying anti-Semitism to the level of a Holocaust. Now, I don't blame the psychiatric community, but look at this. On the website of the German Association for Psychiatry and Psychotherapy, we have the following quote: "Without the initiative and support of psychiatrists and other doctors, the National Socialist Euthanasia Program could not have been implemented." I mean, those are strong words. In 2010, the then president of the association formally asked the victims of the Nazi era and their families for forgiveness for the pain and injustice suffered in the name of German psychiatry, the hands of German psychiatrists under National Socialism, and for the silence, trivialization, and denial that for far too long characterized psychiatry in post-war Germany. So I don't blame the psychiatrists, but they seem to blame themselves. Now, why haven't we heard more about this? And as I said, I'm offering opinions here. The optimists say it was because members of the profession were so embarrassed by what happened, they just wanted it to go away. Cynics have a different view, and I'm included in that. In the Psychiatric News published in 2015, they made the following statements. Having this information go public was not in anyone's self-interest. Get this. Many of the physicians who participated returned to civilian life without facing consequences. Two even became president of the German Association of Psychiatry. One German psychiatrist, Gerhard Schmidt, tried to write a book about this, but he couldn't find a publisher for 20 years. No one wanted to hear the story, the president of the association said. In the 60s and 70s, psychiatrists saw themselves as victims. Only beginning in the 80s was there an attempt to examine the past. A comment was made, in addition to all of this, that at the end of the war with the Iron Curtain going up, there was a desperate need to normalize Germany. And these were efforts, and I'm quoting somebody, and I know this is theologically not correct, to get the mark of Cain off of the German psyche. And being amongst the cynics, I can't help but notice that the information started to appear in public just as most of the profession of the World War II generation were well into their 80s and no longer practicing, and in many cases, no longer alive. I really don't like this gentleman, Rudin. He was clearly one of the main architects of the Holocaust. An investigative journalist stated, "I'm sure that Professor Rudin so much as killed a fly in his 74 years. I'm also sure he's one of the most evil men in Germany." And I can sign off on that statement. Rudin was brought to trial at Nuremberg. He was found guilty and justice was dispensed. He was fined 500 marks. I did a little bit of math. That's about the equivalent of 3 red light tickets. Oh yeah, and he was stripped of his Swiss citizenship, so he only had his German citizenship. There are lots of explanations. I mean, no point. Now, I say that the eugenics mess still continues. Forced sterilizations are alive and well around the world. I have some hard numbers in the United States. And bear in mind when you see these, the United States is far, far, far from the worst. As of January 2022, 31 states, including Washington, D.C., have laws explicitly allowing forced sterilization of disabled people. The most recent laws were passed 2019 in Iowa and Nevada. 17 states allow forced sterilization of disabled children. Only 3 states explicitly prohibit forced sterilization of disabled children. 11 states do not have specific language on minors. The rest of the world is much worse. Now, why does this disturb me? This is almost exactly where we were at the start of the 20th century. I'm going to paraphrase George Bernard Shaw here when he said, at this point, they were merely negotiating price. We talk a lot about hate speech and how dangerous it is. You want a cause, take a look at this. This is not subjective by any means. This is objective. These are actions that you can see. And by the way, this is not a red state, blue state thing. Forced sterilizations, the state with the leading number of them was California.